Welcome back to Advertising is Dead with Ajit. Ajit, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Varun. Great to be here.
Yep. When I kind of got the link up to get you on the show, I started a list on a set of questions, right? And as I was doing a bit of research on it, I realized that um, not to just start off from a Facebook lens or an Instagram lens, but really to look at saying from a broader perspective, your career has had this trajectory to where you started off focused on telecom, moved towards streaming with Hotstar, and then eventually at Facebook. When you look at all these three coming together and kind of how the world's kind of shifted, I'd love to get your like slightly broader perspective on how the world around us has changed because of these three and in general.
Yeah, it's interesting, and Varun, not always you kind of think and see, how do you connect the dots, right? And I'm not sure whether I've spent enough time thinking about the patterns, but um, if I look back at the mid '90s when I was doing a lot of work as a consultant for telecom operators and ISPs in Southeast Asia. Um, the big question at that point was how do you expand access first to the mobile and the internet, where economics was the big constraint, right? I think just the given the cost, it wasn't clear how do you get to hundreds of millions of users or billions of users. And I remember, I think this was in 2000 or 2001, when, as all good consultants do, we believe that we can predict the world 15, 20 years out. We were, I think, doing work for Singtel, and we were trying to put a number on how much Singtel should bid for the 3G license that was opening up. If you remember the big auctions in Europe, and Asia followed. And the big prediction was that mobile commerce would explode and mobile content would explode. But you had to kind of figure out how to put numbers against how exactly will the telco monetize it. And all of those assumptions were made in a pre-iPhone world, right?
Yeah.
This is 6 years before the iPhone. And when I think back, I think we massively over predicted the near term, and obviously was completely clueless about a 20-year time frame. But I think so much of the thinking in those early days was influenced by what had worked on voice, and even the innovative thinking on mobile data, I think, could not really grasp how the world could change over the next 15 years. And then I think the second part, when I think about it, streaming, and I remember spending time in the US again as a consultant working for media companies, and there was an interesting work that I did for a traditional media company, and this was not that long ago. I think it was 2006 or 2007 when the biggest question that company was solving was how do they match the demand in Walmart retail stores for DVDs during the Christmas season. How do you match what consumers are likely to want on Christmas versus the manufacturing of those DVDs, so that you actually met supply and demand? And this was, when you think about it, this was a few years into the Netflix DVD mail order business, right? But well before streaming. And I think within 18 months of that project, I think that question was not relevant at all. So I think a lot of the work in media was really, the transition of traditional media to the new world. And in many ways, when I think back, how long it took, right? I think even when the models were very visible, YouTube first, and then, Hulu and Netflix, I think it took a long time for the traditional media companies to understand that there is a fundamental shift here that could be an explosive opportunity, but could also change the nature of how content was being created, how the matching of content happened, and even the definition of a hit, right? I mean, if you think about it, a lot of before you get to thinking about the business model, a lot of media companies, the core structure of media companies were all designed around what was a hit and how do you create a hit. And when the thinking around what is a hit is established over 50, 60, 70 years, then you can imagine why it takes time to recognize that what is a hit may have fundamentally changed, and therefore you have to change everything. And then when I look at it now, Varun, I think the big change is the role of the creator. I think the not just in the context of advertising, but just in the context of what are people interested in and passionate about in terms of popular culture, media. I think the big change is that you're seeing the emergence of creators who have the ability to build followership overnight and then influence not just what people are thinking and interested in, but even potentially what kind of products and services they gravitate towards. So, your own framing from the telecom world to now, I think it's gotten a lot more interesting. Everything has gotten a lot more democratic. I don't think institutions have the ability to put up walls and boundaries and say, show me how much you can jump and climb before I let you into the fortress. And then you're seeing that popular culture is being defined by a lot more people around the world, and it can no longer be orchestrated and controlled and driven by a few people living in just a couple of cities in the US.
You mentioned democratizing. I think that's actually one of the terms which I've started to use a lot more in recent times. And I say that because I feel every creator now has their own is their own media company. You're just building channels of distribution for yourself. Whenever I speak to a creator, I feel I've learned a lot over the last 2.5 years of doing this podcast by just speaking to creators more than anybody, because the way they look at data, the way they look at their archives. I mean, for anyone who's ever worked in a media company, some of those things are much broader discussions. Here, this person's just doing it off their phone and they're talking about, okay, I archive data to use later, or I look at data archive footage for later, or use data this way. It's interesting how their mindsets work, and there's a certain level of acceleration of that, right? The scaling out of that, because the only way we could communicate is how we're even doing this now, right? Is that you're doing it through a digital medium, so you're communicating, you're expressing. How do you think that's affected culture at large, right? There's a huge cultural shift when suddenly you go from being consumers to being media companies. I don't even use creators anymore. So like everyone's a media entity to itself. How do you think that's affected culture?
Yeah, I think that's such a big question, and I want to try and at least, and I'm curious, Varun, whether you would agree with it, but before we kind of talk about culture, I think just to explain what may have happened, and in some ways, I think it explains the context of your question. I think three big things happened that made this moment possible, right? One, the extent to which what you're calling media vehicles, creators, but fundamentally individuals, right? You don't need a large number of people to come together in an organized setup to create things that millions of people find compelling. The first thing that changed dramatically, I think, that created that moment is the easy access to creation tools.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned that you worked in Channel V. You don't need expensive, large equipment that is cited in a few specific locations anymore, right? And I think the smartphone was the starting point, but everything that's happened in the last 10 years in terms of better editing tools, they're available on the phone, better creation tools, I think that enabled the moment. That's one. The second part, I do think it's companies like ours, but not just us, that with their global reach made it possible for these creators to find a voice without someone in the middle saying, I like you or I don't like you, right? I mean, if you look at the power structure of traditional media, there's always been an intermediary who kind of got to say, I like your work, I don't like your work. and many of these intermediaries were fabulous judges, but over time, sort of they themselves become victims of their formula and their framework, and and therefore the stagnation happens. So I think the platforms like ours, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or our peers, with global audiences, it essentially, the affirmation came from any group of people anywhere could look at what I created and say I like it, and find its own momentum and affirmation. And then I also think the fact that in terms of the proliferation of choices for consumers, that they no longer are expecting that I will get the best story or the best format from television, right? They're democratic in their head as well, I think. I don't think it's that they only look at Instagram or Facebook. I think they look at radio as well, and they look at TV as well, and podcasts, right? I think there's been democratization that has happened in the head as well. Consumers have also been trained to the idea that there is no hierarchy of platforms, that you may get these interesting things that spark off and fly around and resonate with you across any media. So if these three things have created that moment, then there is no question that it's defining culture by essentially making it democratic, but by also making it entirely two-way. The hierarchy has been broken, right? I may be the consumer today, but I am tomorrow's biggest creator. And I may be inspired by something Varun has done, and tomorrow I may be bigger than Varun, right? And I think that is one of the fundamental shifts in the power dynamic, that by breaking the hierarchy in media, and by breaking essentially the sense that someone will define the popular culture and everyone else is a consumer, I actually think you have managed to now create a virtuous cycle where, because the consumers know that they themselves can be the creators and the people who define what is big tomorrow, there is even more openness to what is big today. And I think that's what we are seeing. And therefore, it means that things can go big very quickly. It means that the person or institution that defines popular culture can come from anywhere in the world. But it also means that it can go away pretty quickly as well. Because it's not been identified and nurtured, and there isn't all these institutions to preserve the incumbency for a period of time that makes it economically viable. It can all change pretty quickly. But I think everyone is comfortable with it. I think for most people, you look at it and say, this is quite a fabulous world where I know that I have a shot. I know that I have a shot to make it big. I know that I have a shot to make it big in a very short period of time. But I'm also comfortable that I couldn't, what may be big today may not be big tomorrow. And that's fine as well.
Yeah, and you make a few interesting points there, right? And I totally agree with the perspective you put across. Primarily because there's something I was told recently, which kind of rung true, is that the generation we have right now is the first generation who had creation tools in their hands from a very young age. Like you mentioned, the fact that if somebody had to create any form of content before, the barriers of entry were much higher. Large scale cameras, sets, all those expenses. Now just pick up a phone, you can make something. And in most cases, the stuff you do by picking up your phone and making it is actually going to get you a lot more than going shooting in a set. And that's kind of also evolving in a way, I think, because of all the tools, not just from a creation angle, but also from the way that traditionally when you looked at how a piece of content played out, everything seemed a little too complex to understand. Now that's gotten a lot more simplified as well. You can look at the back end and see, okay, which piece kind of worked, which one didn't, which had more comments, how you responded. There is this term that Tanmay uses, which is called the feedback loop. And I love that term because he said that you built yourself a virtual feedback loop from day one. the day you put up your first post and the first comment gives you your feedback. Like, you don't have to worry about someone somewhere, like you mentioned, like, is it good or is it bad? You'll know instantly, right? If nobody comments, then you have your answer. And I feel that looking at it from that lens and constantly creating, but also kind of going back to stuff you created earlier and revamping that around, I think also has changed how traditional media functions, right? I think in a sense, how I would create a reel today, and I have my own reel stories, because I'm a recent, I don't know if the term is reeler. Do I call? Because I always felt like I couldn't do it.
We should start using that as a term, Arun.
Because I was like, I don't know if I can do this, right? And I feel that there used to be a time when you would feel like, okay, is this something I can create? Maybe it's only for young people, and I don't believe that's what it is anymore, right? I've started to follow a lot of creators who I know are like, I'm almost 40. There are people who are of all ages and are putting stuff up. I put up a workout reel some time back, and it's become my thing. I got feedback that what you're putting up seems too difficult to do, so I started making it a meme. So I made it a workout meme thing I do once in a while. But I think people are having fun with it, and they're learning from what someone says. And that kind of adds to everything else, right? When you see how celebrities have evolved, how they post, right? You've gone from just putting out photography of yourself to saying, I'm sharing something about my life. I'm kind of creating content the same way a creator is creating it. So even the idea of a celebrity, or the idea of how even they put their life out there, has totally changed, primarily because of the content they now have to create.
Fully agree. I was thinking, as you were saying, this idea of this is the first generation that has had access to such an explosive toolkit of creation tools. My dad used to have this, I think it was a Yashica, I'm not sure whether I'm saying it right, but it was a black and white camera where you look into it from the top. And this was in the 80s. I think he still has it. And I remember the bar was pretty high for using it, right? It was only special occasions. Even the whole process of buying the film was like a big thing in itself. And then, of course, if you're 41, and maybe you kind of may know it, but I'm not sure. But you have to take the film to like a processing center, right? But it essentially meant that it drove a lot of the behaviors on both sides, right? You wouldn't just pick up and shoot a photo. Like, you would orchestrate a moment, the other side was posting it. And now when I look at my 7-year-old, he kind of takes our phone and starts taking random shots when we're outside. And he doesn't even think twice before he takes the camera and taking pictures. And it, in one generation, it's kind of changed so much. And I think it influences behaviors in a couple of ways, right? One, not just the fact that, the smartphone camera today is, sort of millions of times better than a very expensive or by the standards of that day, expensive black and white camera. It is also that it triggers spontaneity, right? And to the point that you were mentioning about the feedback loop that Tanmay mentions, it also means that you're able to constantly put stuff out into the universe, and get the affirmation as well, right? One is the feedback helps you decide what's working or what's not, but it's so powerful that anything you put out comes with affirmation. That's a different world, right? I mean, it's not just the fact that you can create something, you can create something that is quite good and you can play around with it, but that people quickly discover if you have a talent. And that's the part that I think has changed dramatically as well. And then the other part that increasingly we're seeing, and I think it goes to the point about the feedback loop, is I think we're seeing a generation of products and services, let's say businesses that are, in this case, only on Instagram, let's say, who are adapting their products on the back of what they are hearing on the fly. So it's not even, and again, that again breaks the power structures that have been established for a long time, because there was always this idea that a product is something that is cooked up in a lab. It's not shown it's not accessible, and then there is a big reveal and a moment when you show to the world, and then the only role for the world is to consume. Whereas now you're saying, hey, I may actually have a role in crafting that product or making it better. That's another big difference in terms of, what all of this means in terms of changes in behavior of how people are actually creating things and how that is evolving.
Yeah. What you said about products is great, right? Because a while back I had Sid from Epigamia on the podcast, and he mentioned something which I thought was I never heard of something like that before. He said that when Epigamia wanted to launch a coconut yogurt variant, they did a pre-order. So over 1,000 people, I was one of them, pre-ordered coconut yogurt. Just because I did it because I thought it's such a fun idea. But what they did was they evolved it basis feedback. And I know this feedback happened on Instagram, and that's the way I had the conversation with the brand as well. The more that happens, I feel it's doing two things, right? One is it's bringing us closer to brands. When we talk about marketing and advertising, we've always spoken about these broader lenses of communication. I feel that we're also building intimate relationships with brands, and I feel that this way of just kind of messaging or just like giving that point of view is really also kind of changing that dynamic between and at some point, looking at platforms like Instagram and Facebook, etc., you're kind of helping bridge that whole gap of allowing a consumer and a brand to have an intimate relationship. And at some point that is going to evolve into a scenario where you might have multiple variants come out because you just had multiple conversations with different sets of consumers. Your cohorts kind of go wider in that sense.
Fully, Varun. And I think the interesting part, just to build on what you're saying, Varun, is one, look at the power that all of a sudden, it's not sort of consumers giving you a survey, right? I mean, that's been the traditional one. You will fill out something saying, I liked it, I'm scoring a 4 out of 5. I think the most compelling part of this is that you have a bunch of consumers who are vested in what you're building. And now, as a marketer, if one of your objectives is to create loyalty to the brand, create affinity, I can't imagine a more powerful canvas than, even as you're getting useful feedback for potentially changing the product, evolving it, however we frame it, the very process requires effort from consumers. But consumers put in the effort, but equally that effort itself makes you feel more vested in the product and therefore affinity to the brand. And therefore, I think that again sort of shows the extent to which, that triangular relationship between brands or marketers, in some ways creators, I think, because in all of it, you add into it someone who has a point of view on a coconut yogurt, and you can see that go in different directions. And then, of course, consumers and vehicles or platforms like ours where they're engaging. You can imagine that the fact that we have collectively, that we have all made it possible for any kind of engagement to happen between, those three sides of that triangle, each one of which can create innovation that could not have come in a hyper-structured environment, shows you the power of that model, I think.
Over the recent times, you also kind of built out a lot of India-first pieces, right? And that's been an evolving piece as well. What you just spoke of, I'm just trying to think about that. Again, I think we're talking in triangles today. So talk about brand, consumer, and creator. At some point, what have been evolutions to the platforms that you kind of focused on over the last year and a half, 2 years? I will not say those words which are associated with last year, but I'll say that what have you kind of evolved to kind of make sure that this whole conversation kind of gets accelerated and enhanced.
Yeah, and I'll try and stay away from the C word as well, Varun. It's I think a few different things happened for us, Varun. I think on both Facebook and Instagram, and Instagram in particular. One is just consistent with everything that's happened in India over the last 5 years or so, with 550, 600 million people coming online with access to very affordable mobile broadband. We saw explosive growth on our platforms, right? And therefore, I think it was always the case, but India's sort of surfaced to even more, for the company, even more of a priority. And the lens was, you had the opportunity to have a very young country, which is expressing a lot. And in the context of platforms like ours, where there are public platforms, Facebook and Instagram, expression, it fuels all of engagement. I think the recognition was that we potentially have the opportunity to learn from India, build products and tools for India, fine tune it, and then find a way to kind of apply it to the rest of the world. And that in many ways explains why so much of the action on Instagram has been happening in India. India was one of the first markets for Reels to be tested, one of the first for Reels to be launched. When Reels, when we kind of make it a lot more easier for creators to monetize Reels, India is again kind of going to lead that charter. IG Lite, India is a big part of kind of, hey, as much as a lot of the world is on smartphones, it still would be great to have experiences that work on, more affordable phones, and yet deliver the authentic IG proposition. All of that is happening because I think two things are coming into play. One, I think our company's recognition that the canvas of India allows us to learn from building and launching products here that, no surprise, provides us huge learnings for the world. And second, I think with the kind of population that we have, right? Very young young for the next few years before the curve changes. You actually have the ability for all of our conversation that we had today. What kind of tools work? How do you build followership? How do creators come from 0 to 1 million in 2 months? I mean, I think there are enough examples of creators. I think many of them are your friends, I suspect, who have moved from 9,000, 10,000 followers to 1 million in sometimes 6 months, very often in 2 months. All of that is India. And I think that explains why we are leaning in so much, because it's the vibrancy of expression here, and it's the context of what we can learn from India for the world.
I think that also shows with Virat recently hitting the 100 million mark. Because I was looking at that, I think of cultural icons, and I think we keep coming back to sport in some way, in cricket rather. It seems to be a theme across this conversation. Is I'm also kind of seeing how creators are even thinking of kind of scaling up and kind of evolving their content. And it's not just that. I think there's also an entire ecosystem of companies, etc., kind of coming around them to help them create different things, to help them monetize in different ways. What I'd love to kind of get from you is that if you had to kind of look at specific pieces that you've done over the last year or which you feel have kind of moved this up in a notch. Like, I mean, there've been a bunch of launches over the last year. I'd love for you to kind of get into what each of them are kind of brought to the table. I know they've all done different things for me, but I'd love to hear from you as to what you think they kind of helped accelerate.
Yeah, I think I would call out 2 or 3 of them, right? I think, Varun, I think one, the big one was the launch of Reels, right?
Yeah.
In many ways, I think we always thought of Instagram as a platform, not just in India, Varun, but around the world, as defining popular culture, right? So Instagram was already that, but I think Reels essentially added this sort of extra personality of saying, for a country that is young, what does it mean to express in the short form video format, right? And to our conversation, I think if you look at the direction of the last 15 years, um, if anything, it's become more spontaneous, um, less sort of orchestrated, shorter formats, and I think Reels is sort of the culmination of that. Um, I think the second part is um, a lot of our work was with how do you activate music on Instagram and on Reels in particular, right? And again, I think we are lucky to be home to one of the most vibrant music industries in the world. I think you know the stat, but today 2 out of 5 used music on Reels comes from India, right? Yeah. Globally. So a lot of our effort on the partnership front has been to make sure that we are able to bring on board music labels, as much as also make sure that we are showcasing the ability for creators to use music in the right way. And I think the third thing that we have done is, and honestly, I don't think we have had to orchestrate that a lot. I think it's again one of those cultural phenomena where challenges that kind of originate on Instagram or originate from particular creators. I think we have kind of tried making it interesting by launching many challenges, some of whom with a particular social focus. But I actually think the story is of users and creators, right? I think the big story is about Instagram's growth in the last 18 months. And I remember even a year ago, there was kind of a meme that, hey, Instagram is largely for the upper crust India. And that wasn't true even a year and a half ago. When we looked at the numbers, it was deeper into smaller towns, quite early. But I think the narrative was kind of, this is the hyper, def call in Delhi and Bandra in Bombay crowd. I think if you look at it now, no one is talking about that, right? And that's been the big story of the last 18 months is how deep Instagram has gone. So that enabled a lot of it. And then I think what is fabulously interesting to see is the explosion of creators. And I remember when we launched Reels, we kind of articulated that what we really want to do as an India team is to have a big mega creator come out of India who hits it out of the park globally, not just in India. And I think we saw that as a multi-year ambition. But when I look at some of the movement that we have seen, I feel like that's going to happen a lot sooner than what any of us would have imagined 6 or 9 months ago.
You mentioned getting out of the whole people's perception rather of the whole metro focus rather than going across India, or that standard India versus Bharat conversation. I come from a small town, and I know you do too. And I've always realized that what this does isn't just giving people a voice to create, but also suddenly changes mindset. Right? I remember that first time I came to, I went to Bangalore first to study, and then came to Bombay eventually. There was always that. I think for a long time you tend to have, and I don't know if it's everyone, but I know that I had that about, oh, you're from a small town, so obviously you haven't had as many experiences or as much access as someone from a city would. And now that doesn't, I don't think that holds true at all. You might actually have more experiences because we all have access to the same set of content and capabilities and everything else. And that kind of also, I don't know, it's also bringing merging of cultures in that sense. It's no longer become cities are uppity and small towns are, there are terms used for both categories. I think there's an interesting merging of cultures, bringing out content as well.
Couldn't be more true, Varun. And it's an interesting one. And by the way, I suspect it may not be true for you, but when I grew up in the 80s in Cochin, I was fairly disconnected from what was happening in the rest of the world. I think kind of music cut through, but I think it was...
the only music I heard was Michael Jackson, to be honest.
Michael Jackson and Madonna, I think, were definitely kind of made it to Cochin. But I think that's no longer true. It's interesting, and I think that's the point that you're making as well. I do remember, and this is a bit of a sort of a showcase to geekiness, but there were many occasions when you would want to kind of sign up for a chess scholarship or something interesting, and I remember consistently hearing you had to show up in Delhi for it, right?
Yeah.
There just were a whole bunch of things that you knew was only available for people in Delhi. And all of that has gotten entirely blown out of the water. You're exactly right in saying that in some degree, I think it means that, I don't know whether it's homogenization, because that kind of seems like it's reductive framing, because I don't think it's a reductive framing, but it definitely is something big that happens in New York or Berlin or Shanghai today. I don't think there is too much of a barrier it getting diffused in every corner of the world, almost agnostic to the size of the city that you live in, the income of the household that you belong to, or even the language that you speak at home, in a way that wasn't true 20 or 30 years ago. But I would even flip it. It's an interesting one that I think a lot of big popular things that have gone insanely crazy and defined popular culture, including in the last 2-3 weeks, Varun, have actually come out of smaller towns.
Yeah.
And therefore, again, I think in the context of this conversation and the fundamental democratization of everything and dilution of established power structures, what is interesting is there is no hierarchy to who gets to define a trend as well. It no longer is that a New Yorker and a Delhi defines the trend and a Cochin follows. Some of the most compelling, interesting things are showing up in from very small towns, right? And I think and I think in an interesting way that is making for a world that is more diverse. So it is not just unidimensional. So it is not just that there is one kind of culture that is diffusing rapidly to the world. I think it is that it's being influenced by all kinds of places and people and cultures. So even though it may be diffusing more rapidly, it is still a lot more heterogeneous than it used to be.
Yeah, so true. And I feel what it's also kind of done is it's kind of pushed content creation to go from, I remember that whenever someone asked me what is Instagram for me, I would say Instagram is my happy place, because I never really saw negative content there, so I always go there to check content. I feel it's now become the place I learn so much from, and I know a lot of people kind of come in and learn from as well, right? A large part of the audience of this podcast, for instance, right? Like they listen to it, they learn stuff, they'll write and have queries. We kind of go back and forth. I mean, I know that one of my largest communities is on Instagram, and that happens that way. And it's also kind of building out, I wouldn't even call it inspiration. I think it's more about, I think it's evolving us from just being consumers and creators to actually being educator might be a bit of a stretch, but I feel that we'll be learning from each other, and in some way, as we learn from each other, it also kind of pushes how we all function culturally as well going ahead.
Yeah, and all of that is true. I think I do think it continues to be a joyful place. It continues to kind of define popular culture. And it continues to be a place to learn. I don't know whether you were hooked onto it. One of the biggest things that I learned in the last 2 weeks, and I swear this is true, is the feta. I don't know whether you tried the feta challenge.
No, I haven't.
You put a big block of feta cheese in the middle of pasta, and this was a big thing on Reels. And when you see it, you're like, oh, this can't be that easy. And then when you try it, it's actually easy. And IG is full of I don't remember the challenge. I think it's called Feta Pasta Challenge or something. But it's literally pasta, cherry tomatoes, add whatever spice you want, and a big block of feta. To the point, and I'm not making this up, Varun, when I went to my grocery store in my apartment complex, they had run out of feta, and now I would love to connect it to the IG phenomena, but feta is not that popular in India, and they had run out of it. So that was a huge learning moment for me, right? And again, I think it's exactly what you said. It's fun. You're learning something. There's a lot of joy in it. And I genuinely think it is that combo that you outline, that it's not defining popular culture in some kind of a highly structured way where someone signs off and says, this is popular culture. It is that it's enabling this massive tango with people who are so different, sitting in different corners of the world. And yet there are these moments when they all latch on to this one thing and they find a lot of joy in this one thing, right? Again, without going to the C word, having gone through an experience in the last year where probably for the first time in human history, all of us experienced the same thing, independent of wherever you were on the planet, in terms of, the sense of being constrained to a space, not having the freedom to do what we want. It tells you the power of, creating these cultural moments that are common, that impact hundreds of millions of people. And I see a lot of optimism in that as well, right? Of course, it changes how brands are created and how marketers will think about it and how products evolve. But at the core of it, it's such a phenomenally positive thing to happen to the world, that you do have this massive tango without constraints, and out comes out of it extremely joyful things that very often does not involve a lot of effort. It's not expensive. It doesn't take a lot of effort to do, and yet we all derive disproportionate amount of joy from it. I think that's a big part of what's happening.
I was actually going to ask you, what reel are you waiting to make? And I have a feeling you're a food. I'm going to continue using this word. Are you a food reeler, or what's that reel you've been meaning to make but you haven't made yet?
I must confess, and in ways that kind of annoy the Instagram team here quite a bit, and I get a lot of nudges from the team here and Vishal, who's the head of product at IG, that we don't see you enough on Instagram. I think I'm one of those who spend a lot of time on Instagram, following others and looking at what others are doing. But most of the creation in my house happens between my wife and my 7-year-old. There's a lot of dance moves that happen in the house. We completely qualify as a reeler-ready household, but I'm on the back end of it.
So is that how your last year has been, working from home?
Yes. I think yesterday was sort of exactly a year when all of us kind of went on work from home. I must confess, I had a cheat month, Varun, and it lasted for more than a month. But we, the four of us, Radhika, we have 2 kids, a 7 and 2-year-old boys. We went to Goa for 6 weeks in October, and that was a nice moment, and clearly huge privilege, I think, just to be able to do it. But we realized that our 2-year-old Yash, he turned 1 last year, literally as we went into lockdown, and for the longest time he had seen only 4 or 5 people. And when we finally were kind of allowed to step out of the apartment and we took him down, he would literally run away scared, just looking at people who were around him. So we did think that we needed to normalize his life a bit, and Goa in October, November was a huge break. But otherwise, it's been all from home and largely work.
I know exactly what you mean. I have a 3.5-year-old at home, and at some point she was like, "Are we ever going to get out of the house?"
Right.
So we created this fictional monster called Corona, who she refers to as someone who's beyond a hill somewhere over there,
Nice.
and so we made that into a fairy tale for her to kind of have some sort of visualization of things, as they are. And also kind of I love to hear from you saying beyond work is there something that you spend a lot of time doing that most people would not know, that this is something you actually spend a vast amount of your time focused on?
Varun, I'm trying to think about how to say this without sounding pretentious, because it's not meant to be. I do like the art world a lot, and again, not a plug for Instagram, but it's interesting how much I've discovered about art on Instagram, and again, one of the big things that have happened in the last year is how the art community, right? Everyone from museums to artists have all kind of leaned into, make Instagram a pretty compelling place to learn about art. For example, there's a handle called Imagined Interiors. And all that it does is it takes classical works but focuses on the interiors and kind of highlights it to say, okay, what if this was the interior of a home, right? And in the context of a big piece of art, it may not even have registered. So much to learn, I think, even in art, and that's a huge source of passion for me. And the other one is tennis. I think I first started playing tennis, I think 20 years ago when I was living in Singapore, and then never managed to kind of learn it properly. It was always embarrassing. When I was living in Bombay, I used to go to Car Gymkhana and hit balls, but I knew, I knew how I would look, right? It was ugly. I could zoom out of my body and imagine me playing, and I knew it wasn't a good sight. And the last year has really allowed me to train, and to the point where I now play tennis almost 3 to 4 times a week, and that's been a phenomenal source of joy.
That's amazing. And as soon as you said art, I somehow thought that I also jumping onto the NFT bandwagon that everybody seems to be talking about. It took me a while to not seem like a person who does not understand what was going on, till I eventually found a few, incidentally on Instagram, found a few videos that explained it to me like I was a dumb person, and then I kind of finally got what was happening. What can you put together in an instant?
I can make a good omelette in an instant. And that meets the bar of a 7-year-old who is quite demanding and, who is very vocal about, whether he likes something or not.
Anything that you've read, watched, or listened to in recent times that you'd recommend?
Varun, you will like it given your client. I for the longest time refused to watch The Queen's Gambit because I was like, everyone is talking about it. And when everyone talks about something, I know that it usually is invariably disappointing. And then finally started watching it a couple of weeks ago, and it's been phenomenal. I mean, I'm sure have you seen it?
Yeah, I have. It's fabulous. Even I kind of stayed away. I'm like, okay, do I really want to latch onto it? But eventually succumbed, and thankfully so, because I don't think I've watched as much content as I used to. I listen to a lot more though. I've become a committed podcaster in that sense of the word. But yeah, it's a fabulous show. I think it's brought chess back in an interesting way to the world. I recently discovered that people actually watch live streams of other people playing chess, and I didn't even know that would be a thing, but it supposedly is a thing now. So
I spent a lot of my childhood, a lot of it playing chess with my brother. So I feel like, and again, I think when I kind of look at my boys and the amount of entertainment they have access to, I kind of, the contrast, right, in just one generation. But there wasn't too many things to do. So, it was cricket, marbles. Varun, you probably never played marbles.
I played with marbles as well.
You played with marbles, okay.
I played marbles.
And it was chess. And we used to spend hours, and we were competitive about it. And My brother was 5 years is 5 years older, so a lot of sledging. So I think in the context of that, and I stopped playing a while ago. Queen's Gambit kind of brought that that frame of playing chess back into play as well in a very interesting manner.
I think marbles for me, when you mentioned it, was like I'm trying to figure out how I would ever explain to somebody who's young right now why we would play with marbles, and I cannot think of an interesting enough way to explain why that would be I would say a global pastime, not even like an Indian pastime in that sense.
And collecting marbles was a big thing, and I used to spend a lot of time sort of looking at those patterns inside. And I remember, bunch of us used to like spend hours trading marbles. So yeah, so I would have thought that you were the post marble generation, but I'm glad we're both the same generation, Varun.
Yeah. And my final question, generally, although it gets adapted for every single guest, is what I want to ask you is, why do you think the whole creator revolution is never going to die?
Because I think the human appetite for stories is endless. I think that's the one consistent thing, right? Even as we acknowledge sort of the dramatic movement, Varun, in the last 2 years and 5 years and 10 years, there's a long arc to this, right? I think it didn't start with Instagram. We have been telling stories to each other for a long time, right? Whether it was oral, whether it was written, then movies. And if anything, I think what you discover is that the tradition of storytelling survives. Each generation sort of gives it its own flavor. It believes that it's better than anything the previous generation has come up with. And of course, I think, there's so much change, but fundamentally, the desire to tell stories that have resonance amongst a large number of people and the desire to listen to stories, I think that's been consistent for centuries. So, and therefore, I think the critical role of the creator.
Thank you so much for doing this, Ajit. It's been a fabulous conversation, and I hope you had as much fun as I did. But thank you so much for coming on Advertising is Dead.
I did as well, Varun. Thank you so much for your time.